Welcome to the Week 2 video lecture. The assigned readings for the week were The Challenge of Cultural Relativism by James Rachels, and Can Ethics Provide Answers, which is also written by James Rachels. I want to begin this week by discussing what I'm going to call the relativism observation. And this is the observation that different cultures have different moral rules or norms. Rachels gives us an example of the relativism observation when he gives us Herodotus' account of King Darius. As Herodotus explains, King Darius spoke with two different men from two different cultures. The first was a Chalatian, and the second was a Greek. When he spoke to the Chalatian, he discovered that the Chalatians eat the recently deceased. The Greeks, on the other hand, burned the recently deceased. So King Darius, he had this observation. He realized that different cultures had different rules or norms regarding funerals, or what to do with the recently deceased. Some people experience the relativism observation and jump to conclusions about morality. They say that those different moral rules or norms enforced and created by communities are all that exist. And this is the thesis of cultural relativism. That is, that there are no universal moral truths. There are just the different rules or customs enforced or created by different cultures or societies. But remember that we're doing moral philosophy, and moral philosophy is about facts. It's a fact-driven discipline. And so, when we look at cultural relativism as a theory, we have to see this as a theory about facts. This is that the facts about right and wrong differ between cultures. Notice that it's not the same as saying that there is no right and that there is no wrong. It's just simply that there is a right and there is a wrong. They're just different as we move from culture to culture. Now think about what this means. This means that right and wrong are different as we move across cultures. So what might be wrong or right in one culture might not be right or wrong in another culture. Imagine if this were the case for any other fact-driven discipline. Let's imagine chemistry, for example. Imagine if there were a culturally relative chemistry. That is, where the facts of chemistry are not universal. They don't hold across time and space. They differ as we move from community to community. So, for instance, the boiling point of water in one community might be different than the boiling point of water in another community. This is a pretty radical claim about morality. So I think that Rachels does a great job at motivating the relativism observation. That is, he does a great job of providing us with all of these examples that show us that different cultures and people from different cultures have different rules and norms regarding different practices. But I don't think he does a very good job of showing us how the truth about right and wrong differs from these communities, which is essential to understanding cultural relativism. To help illustrate this, I've come up with a thought experiment. And in order to get this going, we have to imagine this moral traveler, this person who travels all across the globe, into the far reaches of the globe, and comes in contact with many different communities. But all the while, this moral traveler is trying to do the right thing and trying to avoid doing the wrong thing. So they're a good person, essentially. And what we need to imagine is that as this moral traveler is traveling through these different communities and living with these different cultures, all the while, she has to do different things because what is right and what is wrong changes between these different communities. So what might have been right in culture A would be wrong in culture B, or what might be wrong in culture B might be right in culture A. So a good example of this might be the rules or customs regarding eating in different cultures. So if we imagine our moral traveler traveling to one or living with one culture, it might be okay to eat meat. However, in another culture, it might be wrong to eat meat. So we'll see that our moral traveler is performing or trying to perform the same action in these different cultures, but in one culture it's right, in one culture it's wrong. And this is because the facts about right and wrong are going to differ between communities or cultures. That's the thesis, or that's the claim of cultural relativism. Something worth thinking about when we consider cultural relativism is how big or small we want to define cultures. Are we, as members of the United States, one culture, or are we composed of many different cultures? The larger the cultures are, the less we seem to have in common with our fellows. For instance, we seem to have not very much in common with people from Fairbanks, Alaska. Well, I mean, there are some similarities. Um, Culturally, or in terms of how we live our everyday lives, there aren't going to be very many similarities between us and people who live in Fairbanks, Alaska, or Davis, California, or other far places. So if we choose to define cultures in this very large sense, there isn't going to be very much cohesion between the people inside of the culture. In addition, it seems that certain rules or norms are going to be unclear. For instance, as a nation, there's no consensus or there's no right or wrong yet, considering issues like abortion or gun control. We're still trying to figure these things out. And so, as a culture, it's hard to define or identify what the norm or the rule is. Now, if we go the other way, and we try to define communities in a way that's smaller, we have a task set out for ourselves. How small do we want to define these communities? Are we talking about states? Is the state of North Carolina, is that one community? And the state of Florida, another community? Are we talking about cities, so that Monroe or Charlotte is its own community? Or do we want to go even smaller into community groups, like the students at SPCC, or families? But once we define communities in this much smaller way, it seems that we run into another problem, and that is that it seems that we would belong to different communities throughout our lives, or even throughout a day. And if the facts about right and wrong are relative to those communities, or if they're different between communities, it seems that we would be entering different facts about right and wrong as we live our lives. And we have to ask ourselves whether that is true to experience. Is that something that we experience? And that's something that I'd like to, before wrapping up, maybe push out to you as a question to talk about in the discussion forums. Do you feel as you go throughout your day that you're experiencing different norms or rules about right and wrong? Is that something you experience? Maybe when you're at home with your family, there are different rules about right and wrong than when you go to work, than when you hang out with your friends, or something like that. So this will conclude the week 3 video lecture. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.